beautiful metaverse, and more specifically, from beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Corellian tradition. And this is Midday with Rev Don. Welcome, everyone. And as you know, if you follow Midday with Rev Don, you can talk with me directly by typing your comments or questions into whatever platform you happen to be watching the program on, and they will show up here in my chat room and we can talk directly. And I find that one of the best parts of this program. And hello to Dee Dee in the chat room. It's good to see you, Dee Dee. And I find that this is a lovely aspect of the day, getting to see everyone. Now, today I was going to talk a bit about education, and there are a number of things I want to say about it, and we'll launch into that in a few minutes. Hello to Christine in the chat room. It's good to see you, Christine. Once people start to arrive, but obviously I have some background in education. I'm one of the co-founders of whichschool.com, and it has just had its 22nd anniversary just a couple of days ago on September 4th. And also involved in Psychic Academy, which is in the process of being set up. Hello to Anna in the chat room. Hello to Julia in the chat room. It's good to see you. And these have been very important parts of my life. And I suppose I can't say that I was surprised to find myself heavily involved with education, because I did train to be a high clergy person, which includes teaching. I did start working on lessons very early on in life. Hello to Tommy in the chat room. But it was really in the 90s that the lessons that became the Corellian first degree lessons were actually written. And as I say, I had worked on this idea earlier, but not with nearly the same success, which isn't entirely surprising, given that the longer you live, the more you understand about what you're doing. We've talked about some of the things that I took into account in writing those lessons, one of which was accessibility and relevance. Well, I suppose that's two, but you know what I mean. And a lot of this was guided by Edward, who very pointedly reminded me that the persons who were going to be reading these lessons did not have a background before they came to them necessarily. There might be a few, but most were encountering these ideas for the first time. And that meant that they had to be explained as if they were being explained for the first time. And this is a very important aspect of education. Whether we're talking about metaphysical education or any other, you cannot assume that somebody just knows something because you know it. You have to assume that they likely do not. And if it's something that is not part of general culture, you're going to have to explain it. We were talking yesterday about the difference between a censor and a thurible. And of course, a thurible is a censor, but not all censors are thuribles. But unless you're in metaphysics or religion in general, you're not going to have ever heard either of those terms in all likelihood. If you just throw the word thurible into a piece on the subject of incense, people who don't have a background are going to be wondering what it is. Now, that might send them off to look it up online. In the old days, might have sent them to a thesaurus. But it also might just leave them feeling turned off by not understanding what they're reading. It's much better to explain what the thurible is. Now, through Witch School, we reached thousands of people. And for a long time, Witch School was a state-of-the-art site. It might be a little hard to remember that now, but back in 2001, that site was extremely well done, and that programming lasted for the better part of 20 years. and might actually have lasted longer had it um, been addressed differently. Now, Dee Dee says the beauty of it is even those of us that come from other schools of the craft/Wicca, it's basically a refresher of the things we may already know. Plus, it gets us prepared for the initiation current that starts to pull us towards it if we are called. I've had my first degree finished for about a week or so now. And the closer I get to initiation, the more thankful I am for the refreshers of the first degree. Thank you, Dee Dee. In writing the first degree, I have to agree, even if you already know the material, it's good to have those refreshers. And one of the things I did in writing the standardized Corellian materials is I constantly referred to certain things. I brought them back repeatedly to show their importance, to help people to make sure they got them. I didn't just let it sit there once and just assume people will get it. Although people tell me if you go back and read them repeatedly, you find new things you missed the first time, which I am very flattered by. It is a very good refresher, I think. And depending on the background you're coming from, even if you're coming from a background, some of those things might not have been there. I was talking yesterday about spiritualists. And this is not true for all spiritualists, but it was true for spiritualists I worked with fairly early in my life. Grounding had not been a particularly strong thing for them. They would have been greatly helped by studying any material that talked about grounding. It would have been very helpful for them in terms of handling the energies they were handling. But in some branches of spiritualism, it simply is not one of their customs. So I tried to put in everything that I could put in, and I tried to put it in the most accessible manner. And we were very pleased. And I was talking previously about how we were able to reach people who could not otherwise be reached. People who were geographically isolated. Our former dean of mentors, Carla Summers, lived in South Dakota in a small town where there was very little, if any, other people interested in Wicca. She also came to us with a back injury at the time, and she was able to study with us despite being disabled, which would not have been true necessarily in a real-time community at that time. And Dee Dee says, I totally agree, and I do that with several other books that I had when I first came into the craft 2 decades ago. I make a point to reread or studiously skim through them on occasion. And, this can be very important. You can find things you didn't see the first time because you've learned more. Your consciousness has expanded, your experience has expanded, and things that, even though you might think you understood them the first time you read them, you may go back and find that you understand them way better now. And sometimes if you didn't understand them, you'll find you do understand them now. So I think it's a good idea to go back and restudy materials. I've often, as I've done one rewrite after another of these materials over the years, I've sometimes sat there thinking, how often am I going to have to heal with this first degree material, this second degree material, this third degree material that I'm re-editing again. But it's actually really, really helpful to do that, because for me, that's how I go back and reread them when it's time to update them. And it's been quite interesting. And as I say, we reached people who were either geographically isolated or physically isolated. And we trained thousands of people. In the Corellian tradition, we trained literally thousands of priesthood. And a couple of dozen archpriesthood over the period of these many years. But thousands of priesthood. And that really makes me feel very proud. It makes me feel very happy that we did that. And so, once people come, sometimes they stay, sometimes they move on to other things, but they always take with them whatever knowledge they gain. One of the things that we found in 2009 when we went to Australia was that there were a lot of people studying through witch school in Australia, a lot of people studying Corellian materials in Australia, but for various political reasons. And what does that matter? In my mind, they were getting good information that was teaching them a practical way of using these skills. And, I was just happy to see it going forward in any way. And that's still really my attitude. I'm much more interested in the information getting out. And I think that's a very good thing. We have influenced, through witch school, an awful lot of the community, including parts of the community which would never admit to having been influenced by us, but we did. And it is a thing. It, in my mind, is about making that material accessible to everyone who wants it in a way that they can practically use it. And they don't have to belong to an organization for that to be of value to them. It will be of value to them no matter what they do. And Dee Dee says, it's very true about it being accessible, and we will continue to make it more accessible. We even have deaf and hard of hearing folks, herself included, who are looking forward to working on ASL interpretations of things, which is very, very important. One of the things I've been very proud of is that over the years, we have, at many of our events, been able to have ASL interpreters. Not all of them, because it depends in part on who's available at the given time. But at many of them, we have been able to have interpreters, which I think is very important. And I'd like to see us do more with that. Dee Dee goes on to say, many sects of the craft aren't welcoming to most folks with disabilities. And the Corellian faith was the only one I truly found that was accessible enough for me. And unfortunately, that's true. Certainly not true for everyone, but it's true for some. For a variety of reasons, including simply not understanding. But I think it's very important as we go forward that we be as accessible as we can be. And I've been very proud that we did that. Actually, I'd have to say that overall, I'm quite proud of everything that we have done in these many years, particularly through witch school, which has done so many great things, both for the Corellian tradition and outside of the Corellian tradition. And again, in my mind, I think back to those glassy-eyed or dead-eyed, glassy-eyed dead psychics, that's what I used to call them back in the day, who didn't know how to ground and whose mental health on occasion was influenced by this in bad ways. And I think that by making this kind of information more widely available, whether you're joining any particular organization or not, you have the potential to benefit from that, at least to be exposed to it. And I think that's very important. Now, we're about halfway through our hour. I also wanted to talk about future things in education. One of the things, actually, Chris Copeland from Speak Your Own Book had a post. Let me read it to you. And I want to take off kind of from there. So the post says, American public education is not free. Between school supplies, fundraiser contributions, classroom snacks and parties, required technology, clothing, and sports participant fees and equipment, parents come up with a lot of cash for this free education. American pagans, that money could be better spent on a pagan school for children. Since school libraries are empty, queer children are being persecuted, young girls are being harassed by Andrew Tate wannabes, BIPOC children are having their Librarians replaced with cops, and Christian nationalism has invaded the American public school system. It's time to consider alternatives, such as parent-funded, student-led private schools. And she goes on to say, I know there are plenty of pagan teachers who are qualified to run a classroom or even a whole school. And they're way better at transparent budgeting than these greedy-ass public superintendents and principals. And she continues on that vein more than we need to continue. But I do want to speak to this issue that she's raising and some ideas about it. But first, I see that Tommy in the chat room, hello, Tommy, says, if I may ask, I am disabled and I would like to know, is Witch School affordable for someone like me? Well, Witch School has always had a free alternative for many of our classes. And that includes up to like 35 classes to get started at. And it's also available at a monthly fee, which if I remember correctly was $5. So I would think that would get everything. I would think it could be affordable. And I'm not certain at this time because I'm not really involved in running Witch School at this point. But I would think that you might also talk to them about possible scholarships as well. We used to give those quite regularly. So yes, I think it could be, I would think it should be affordable, particularly at the very beginning of study. And of those 35 classes that are offered for free, several took a whole year to complete if you do it properly. And so they would hold, they would take quite a bit of time, and they offer quite a bit of instruction for no particular charge. Also, it used to be that if you were to become a mentor, you could become a free lifetime member. I'm not quite sure what they offer now, but I'm sure there's something similar. The last I knew, I believe you could still become a full lifetime member by becoming a mentor. So it could be affordable that way also. Now, coming back to the idea of pagan public schools, I think this is something that we really need to look at in the future. Sir Edward has a point he often makes that we don't really have freedom of thought if we don't control our own education. If someone else controls your education, they also control a lot of what you're going to think. And also whether you're going to think. You know, I don't know that most people realize that thinking on one level is something we do naturally, but on another level, it's an art you have to learn. Some people are far better at it than others, and those who are far better at it have usually been taught how to think, how to use critical thinking skills. My mother, even though I certainly don't claim to be the greatest critical thinker, but my mother started teaching me critical thinking when I was a toddler. She had a game that we would play called I Spy with My Little Eye, which comes actually out of Jesuit teachings. And you would pick something in the room, and the other person would have to guess it based on clues that you gave. And this was a way to learn how to look at things for what they are, see their details clearly, and repeat them. And usually the first question was, is it bigger than a bread box? Which would be meaningless to anyone today because who today has a bread box? But back in those days, bread boxes were still used. Not so much now, of course. But you know, this is a very useful technique in learning critical thinking. There are many others. It doesn't have to be a deep exercise in an intellectual way. It's a matter of learning how to do it by habit and by how you look at things. And I think we desperately need that in our education system. Because the truth is, the person It's not the person who necessarily has all the right answers who is always going to be in a good position. It's the person who knows how to ask the right questions. Because if you can ask the right questions, you can get the right answers. Now, in terms of why we don't have this in the pagan community, there are a lot of pagans who have wanted to do this. There are certainly some out there right now who would like to do this, to have an actual education system for our young people. The closest we've come is that there are people doing pagan home education systems. But there are a variety of reasons why that really isn't the ultimate answer. One of which is that it very often relies on systems that have been created in other religions being adapted into pagan thought. And it also tends to limit physical interaction, which can be very important. And, there are a couple of reasons I think that we haven't seen more progress on this. One of them is that some of the people who really want to do it are the last people who should be doing it. And I can think of a couple of individuals I've known who really wanted to create a school for children, and I'm so grateful they never did. There are others who would be good for it, but they also recognize the risk they'd be taking in leaving their day jobs to try to start this, and how likely it could be to fail. It takes a certain mindset to be willing to make that level of sacrifice. And for all that as a community we say we want it, can we in fact support it? That's a totally different question. Obviously, for the vast majority of people who want it, it would be a distance learning system. Only a few could be in any given place in physical time. And I'm not even sure physical time is in the future of education at all, not just ours. But I think it's something we really need to be looking at for our future. I talk a lot about how if we want to control our image, then we must control our image. If we want to control our future, we also must control our future. And what is the future? The children are the future. It used to be, in many places at least, that the public education system in the United States, although I don't think it was ever good in a classic sort of sense, was at least for the most part not terribly objectionable. Since it's become so highly politicized, in certain places it's a huge mess at this point. With certain individual political parties and religions wanting to extend control over it in ways that are disadvantageous to everyone else. So I think that developing a school system is a very good idea. I'd like to see people start to talk about this. But here are the things that are necessary for that to happen. And that is actual pagan school teachers willing to give their time and effort to it. People with higher degrees in education willing to give their time and effort to it. It's not going to happen without a lot of organization. It can't happen just because people want it unless they're also willing to build it. That building thing is one of the harder things that there is to do in the world. One of the harder things in our community also, because there is a certain tendency in our community for a certain segment of the community to attack anyone who builds anything, which makes people a little bit less inclined to do it. But these are the things that will be necessary to do it. And the other thing, of course, and this will be an issue, is that we would need to have at least some agreement on what we consider a desirable education. And I can tell you that if I were to try to put such a thing together, there'd be a lot of people who would probably feel that I was trying to move a little too fast, although I don't think so. I remember years ago there was a school in Chicago, a private school, which was noted among other things for having elementary school children studying Shakespeare and enjoying it. Um, I think personally that any such educational system must be multilingual from the very beginning, and I think more than just bilingual. I think that learning different languages at that point in life will make people much more able to learn them later also. And this will not only help them to get along with people from other backgrounds, but also will help them with things like computer languages, with mathematics, which is a kind of language as well. Um, Being able to learn a language early on, other than just the basic language that you speak, I think is vitally important. But I know a lot of other people who might not feel that way. I think that involving math very early on is very important, but um, not just the obvious math, but theoretical math at a fairly early point, because that's the most fun part of math, and the thing that actually would get people interested. Most people who study math in the United States never get to the good part of math at all. They just think of it as being a very difficult, not fun subject for most of them, whereas it actually could be presented very differently. Music is another another language that I think needs to be there very early on. Why does it need to be there? Well, partly because of creativity, but also because of that ability to learn things. Learning music makes you more able to learn other things later. These are some of the things I'd like to see. Um, and I think that if you look historically at the education of um, upper class children, who are the ones who are being educated historically, they were much farther along, much earlier in life than the vast majority of students today. And one reason was that nobody assumed they couldn't. Um, and it, and of course, they also were able to get more individual attention. But if you look at things that were written by, for example, Elizabeth I, when she was in her preteen period, you'd be seeing college students writing at that level today if they could. What's the difference? Well, she was exposed to these ideas. That was basically the difference. I think we make a terrible mistake talking down to students. But these are some of the things I would love to see in such a program. But they also speak to how that agreement on what's going to be there is going to be very important. Because many of the things I've just described are not things that other people would necessarily consider to be equally important. But I'd like to see us have more of a conversation about education for young people in our community, either as an augmentation to the existing public schools or as a replacement. I think it really is time for us to go there after all these many years. So with that, I see we've come to the end of our half hour. I hope you found it interesting. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I love spending this time with you. I love you all. Thank you. And let us close with our prayer as we always do. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all that you do in our lives, and we pray that we shall go forward together, hand in hand, for many years to come. We ask you to help us to see the things that we need and to help us to think critically as we go forward in our lives. Help us to see things in practical and useful ways. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, with great love, we thank you, and knowing you are always with us, but from respect, we thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always. And may you be blessed now and always, and I will see you tomorrow. And until next time.